The issue of a focus on performance over presence in modern churches is a key factor causing disengagement from prayer meetings. It reflects a shift away from the New Testament view of the church as the temple of Christ in 1 Corinthians 3:16 and Ephesians 2:21 through 22, as well as the early Christian understanding of prayer as a covenantal encounter with God's presence. This emphasis on performance, centered on polished services, measurable results, or external appeal rather than fostering a deep relational connection with God, undermines the Hebraic-rooted idea of the church as a house of prayer for all peoples, as stated in Isaiah 56.7.
In this discussion, we will examine this issue by linking it to early Christian prayer practices and New Testament temple theology, while grounding the conversation in the natural Hebraic worldview, free from external influences like Greek philosophy. We will also feel free to use organic Hebrew names and terms. Additionally, we will critically explore the implications and suggest ways to hopefully restore a focus on God's presence.
Let's first examine the focus on polished services. Is it fair to say that most church gatherings are often meant to be engaging, entertaining, or emotionally impactful, with an emphasis on high-quality music, lively preaching, or visually appealing presentations?
I would argue that this focus on performance contrasts with the Hebraic view of prayer as a covenantal, communal encounter with God's presence, as depicted in the Old Testament temple, 1 Kings 8:30, and the early church's practices, as stated in Acts 4:24-31.
In the New Testament, the followers of the Way are the temple after the death and resurrection of Yeshua, our anointed Messiah, whom are indwelt by the Ruach, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 3:16, 6:19, and Ephesians 2:21-22. This fulfills the Tanakh promise of Yahweh's presence among his people, as found in Exodus 25:8 and Leviticus 26:11-12. Early follower prayer practices during the Apostolic period, rooted in the ancient Hebraic tradition, prioritized Yahweh's presence over performance, offering a stark contrast to modern church practices.
Let's explore prayer as an encounter with Yahweh's presence, as early followers believed prayer was a way to access Yahweh's presence within the community of believers. In Acts 4:24-31, the group's collective prayer led to a visible experience of the Ruach's power, with the place shaking and the followers filled with boldness. This reflects the ancient Hebraic view of the temple as a dwelling place for Yahweh's Shekinah, as described in 1 Kings 8:10-11, now fulfilled in a community filled with the Ruach.
Prayer in the early gatherings was relational, rooted in the ancient Hebraic understanding of covenant communion with Yahweh, taught in the Tanakh. The Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6:9-13 and apostolic prayers, such as Ephesians 3:14-19, focus on Yahweh's glory, kingdom, and transformative work, rather than on performative eloquence. There was no ritual type of liturgy. These were raw and organic communications.
Early gatherings for prayer were communal, uniting followers as the body of the Messiah to seek Yahweh's will, as seen in Acts 2:42 and 12:12. Prayers often served a missional purpose, such as asking for boldness to preach in Acts 4:29-30, or to spread the gospel, as in Colossians 4:3-4, reflecting the ancient Hebraic view of the temple as a house of prayer for all peoples. Today, the focus often shifts to performance, which can lead to more emphasis on individual satisfaction or church growth metrics.
The first reason why modern church leaders focus more on performance that comes to mind is cultural consumerism. The idea that modern churches function within a consumer-driven culture where members expect engaging and polished experiences. Leaders might feel pressured to compete with secular entertainment, emphasizing performance aspects like music or preaching over prayer, which is less immediately attractive.
For me, the next priority is the pressure for measurable success, focusing on quantifiable outcomes, such as attendance, giving, or program success, which are easier to measure than the spiritual impact of prayer. In the Apostolic period, prayer was valued for its role in invoking Yahweh's power, as seen in Acts 4:31, rather than for visible metrics, reflecting the Hebraic trust in Yahweh's covenant faithfulness, as described in Leviticus 26:12.
We should also recognize that leaders might not be trained to foster a culture of prayer or to prioritize God's presence, as Jesus and the apostles did by modeling prayer. Modern leaders may lack the formal education needed to lead prayerful encounters. Bible colleges might be defaulting to performance-driven models.
The drive to be seeker-friendly may have allowed secular influence on expectations, such as instant gratification or entertainment, to infiltrate church culture. Could this also have contributed to the mentioned boredom and disengagement, especially with the early followers' patience in prayer, as seen in Acts 1:14, rooted in the Hebraic rhythm of waiting on God, as described in Psalm 41?
The absence of meaningful prayer, the main way to connect with His presence, could be the underlying cause of meetings being called boring or ritualistic.
The focus on performance rather than presence indicates a theological and cultural shift away from the New Testament view of gatherings as a Ruach-filled event, where prayer is central to its covenantal identity. Early followers prioritized Yahweh's presence, trusting the Ruach to empower their prayers, as in Romans 8:26, and regarded prayer as a communal act of dependence, not a performance meant to impress. Today's emphasis on polished services and measurable results reflects a consumerist influence that values human effort over divine encounter, opposing the Hebraic focus on seeking Yahweh's face, as in Psalm 27:8. This change risks reducing the church to a religious institution rather than a living temple where Yahweh dwells, as in 2 Corinthians 6:16.
Okay, let's now focus on solutions, such as encouraging diversity, teaching prayer, and creating welcoming environments, which are practical but still fall short without a renewed theological commitment to gatherings of followers as a house of prayer. Leaders must regain the early apostolic conviction that prayer is the lifeline, linking it to Yahweh's presence and mission.
Amen. Leaders should model prayer as a pursuit of Yahweh's presence, as the apostles did in Acts 6:4, emphasizing intimacy with Yahweh over polished performance. Teaching congregants to seek God's face, as in the Hebraic tradition, as seen in Psalm 105 verse 4, can reframe prayer as a covenantal act.
I agree that we should incorporate prayer into all aspects of gatherings, sermons, worship services, and decision-making, reflecting the early apostolic rhythm. We should also encourage Ruach-led prayer, trusting the Ruach's intercession as seen in Romans 8:26-27, to restore the energy of early gatherings like those in Acts 4:31. This approach aligns with the Hebraic view of prayer as an encounter with the living Elohim.
Indeed, shifting prayer times toward kingdom-focused intercessions, such as revival or global mission, as mentioned in Colossians 4:3-4, aligns with the vision of a house of prayer for all peoples.
Create spaces where Yahweh's presence is prioritized over performance, encouraging vulnerability and authenticity in prayer. Make prayer meetings welcoming and relational, similar to the early home-based gatherings.
Let's summarize the shift in modern churches from prioritizing presence to focusing on performance. This shift emphasizes polished services and measurable results over the relational, Ruach-led encounter with Yahweh's presence that defined early apostolic prayer. Rooted in the Hebraic tradition, early followers saw prayer as central to their identity as the temple of the Messiah, as mentioned in Ephesians 2:22, where Yahweh dwells among His people, similar to Leviticus 26:11-12. The modern focus on performance, driven by consumerism, pressure for results, and a weakened theological vision, undermines the role of the church as a house of prayer, which leads to disengagement from prayer meetings. To restore this calling, leaders must prioritize Yahweh's presence, model Ruach-led prayer, and create a culture where the congregation embodies the New Testament vision of a vibrant, covenantal house of prayer for all peoples, as in Isaiah 56:7.
If you, listeners, have areas of interest you'd like to explore further, questions or comments, please don't hesitate to let us know.